Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you're watching What If Naruto Became Immortal and Saved Avatar Aang. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no more time. Let's start the story.
In Konoha, in a very short period of time, the Hidden Leaf village had seen many changes, weathered a great deal, and was now standing tall. The residents of the Land of Fire village were able to experience a new era of peace and prosperity while maintaining the delicate balance between the five elemental countries despite losing many of its members. The Shinobi Alliance prevailed in the conflict with Sasuke Uchiha and Uchiha Madara, although it was with the help of one of the most well-known heroes from the village of Konoha, the Five Kages, who had led the war, had managed to survive. After his battles with Akatsuki and Pain during the ninja attack on the village, Naruto Uzumaki, who, ironically, had been the target of fear and hatred for most of his life because he was a Jinchuriki, who had previously been the class clown and the target of covert contempt and hatred, was hailed as the village's hero and savior. He and Killer Bee, the last of the Jinchuriki, engaged in a titanic battle that literally rocked the world's foundations when they battled together to confront the Akatsuki leader and defeat his schemes. Here, Naruto defeated his old friend by using the power that Sasuke's brother Itachi had given him. Even though the insane Uchiha head had implanted his brother's eyes, it was sufficient to guarantee that he would live, but that he would no longer pose a threat to the world because his Sharingan was totally deactivated, making him completely blind to the outside world. Madara's plans had finally come to an end as a result, and it had been guaranteed that the two Jinchuriki would eventually kill him. Although there had been some gloomy times when both were pushed to their absolute limits, Madara's death meant that he was no longer a threat to global freedom. All five villages wanted Sasuke to be punished for his crimes after the battle, but Naruto chose to speak up and spare Sasuke's life, despite the opposition of others. He reminded them that he had been the one to stop his old friend, so it was up to him to decide how to handle him. Sasuke became angry and insulted Naruto, calling him scum. However, Naruto was no longer easily provoked, and although he still felt a certain amount of friendship with Sasuke, he realized that his friend was no longer there. However, without the Sharingan or his vision, Naruto chose to banish Sasuke to a prison where he would no longer pose a threat to anyone despite his refusal. He was to receive humane treatment, food, water, and medication. The former Uchiha spat at that, but he knew that nothing would change despite his hatred. His wish to use it to destroy the world was dashed, and he was now doomed to darkness forever. Tsunade then held the position of Hokage for 3 more years before handing it over to Naruto. However, she made the decision to tell the village about Naruto's true ancestry before resigning as Hokage. The villagers who had previously treated Naruto with hatred, resentment, and contempt were appalled at how they had treated him as a child and sought to ask for his forgiveness after learning of Naruto's parentage and the actual circumstances surrounding the deaths of the 4th Hokage and his wife, the other Jonin, with the exception of Kakashi, who had long since discovered Naruto's true ancestry, were even more shocked than the rest of his friends. At the age of 19, Naruto became the youngest Konoha ninja to hold the position since his father Minato. To the surprise of the villagers, he gathered them and started pointing out those who had always denigrated him, forgiving them in the process. He went on to say that he understood their current feelings and the reasons behind their intense animosity toward him because of everything he had been through. However, he made an effort to demonstrate that he was more than what he appeared to be to them, that he still saw them as people he would protect, and that he had never let the hardships and adversity of his life bring him down. He acknowledged that although he had fulfilled his life's ambition and brought peace to the realms, he was still a little hesitant about becoming Hokage because he lacked the talent of his predecessors, particularly his father. People nodded in agreement and supported him when he cried and wished his parents were present to witness their son become Hokage. He then asked a number of people to come forward when called. To the surprise of the Sannin, he called Shizune, Yamato, Iruka, Kakashi, and Sai Tsunade. Since he trusted them all with his life, he informed them that they would be the new council members. Many, including the ones in question, were taken aback by this, but they accepted it despite Tsunade's aversion to reviewing papers again. But Naruto reassured her that this time, she wouldn't have to work alone. Naruto promised to use all of his strength to ensure that the will of fire burned for everyone, including the upcoming generations. Everybody in the village, including those Naruto thought of as his lifelong friends, smiled when he asked for everyone's help in order to accomplish that goal together. As the last descendant of the Uzumaki clan, he was informed by those knowledgeable about the laws of the land that he had the option to rebuild the clan and create it again when he was appointed Hokage. According to the law, he had the option to get married and assist in starting the clan over from the beginning since he was a legitimate heir to one that had survived for so long. As the village's legitimate heir and Hokage, he made the decision to do so after consulting his new counselors, who concurred that the idea had merit. He was a little concerned about it and made the decision to give it careful thought because he wanted to have a happy marriage, not one based only on convenience or the law, as word of the situation spread throughout Konoha and eventually the rest of the world. He had no idea that he was going to be in for more than he had anticipated. Soon after, he received a flurry of letters from different women who wanted to help him rebuild his clan. Letters from the Land of Fire, as well as from other places and countries, were sent by both ninja and civilians. To his surprise, he recognized a number of names from other places. One came from head priestess Xian in the Land of Demons, reminding him that she still required his assistance in order to grant her abilities to a new priestess. Koyuki was pleased to see him develop into the man she had hoped he would be, and now she wanted to see how much he had matured. The other was from the Land of Snow, Spring. The next came from the Land of Vegetables because Haruna wanted to thank him for everything he had done to improve her as a person and to see how he had matured as well. The next came from the Land of Birds, where Toki herself was very happy for him and wanted to assist him in managing his village and developing into a good man in many ways. The letter from Tamari, of all people, was the one that caught him off guard the most. Of all things, he had not anticipated that. However, Tamari responded that the council in Suna had asked for this, and even Gaara had agreed to her marriage to him. Tamari also had to acknowledge that she thought he was a handsome and trustworthy man, and that he was the only man her two male siblings respected and approved of as a possible boyfriend, or, in this case, husband. The letters were not only from other countries and lands, they were also from the Land of Fire. Amaru, who had grown to be one of the most well-known physicians and surgeons in the country, wrote him to express her gratitude for everything he had done for her during her darkest moment and to offer to help him recover in any way she could. Additionally, there was a letter from Hinata herself, requesting permission to fully express her love for him for as long as she could remember. After some time, the Kunoichi told her blonde friend and the Hokage that it would be better if he got to spend some time with them all to see if he should accept them into the clan when it was time for him to start rebuilding the clan he belonged to. He was still getting used to all the attention and had the opportunity to talk to Sakura about it because she could help him figure out what to do in this kind of situation, but he made the decision to inquire if she would be open to joining them. Naruto had been trying to explain that he had loved Sakura for years and wanted to know if there was any chance that she would love him back, but it had been a tense moment. To his astonishment, she consented, and once the concerned women showed up, a protracted period of days would be spent getting to know each other and building mutual respect and trust. Naruto himself made every effort to form relationships with them and learn as much as he could from them. It took Naruto only 4 to 10 months to finally accept the idea of leading the resurrected Uzumaki clan. The wedding was incredible, and Naruto pondered how his parents and godfather would respond if they were still alive today. His mother would have warned him not to be too harsh with the women in his life now and might have questioned whether he could manage being around so many women. His godfather would have undoubtedly wanted him to tell everyone about the wedding night he was planning. He wasn't even interested in speculating about his father's reaction, but he was certain that he would have been giggling at his expense. All of that, however, is now behind Naruto, who ruled for more than 40 years and became a respected Hokage who rivaled his father and even the previous Hokage. Even though there had been fighting between various ninja and civilian factions during his rule, there had also been peace, prosperity, and national unity. Notwithstanding his advanced age of 59, Naruto maintained his youthful appearance and vitality, and unlike the Sannin Tsunade, there was no age or body manipulation because Naruto's Uzumaki ancestry was evident. Everyone now knew that he was able to live a much longer life than others, have a remarkable level of health, and have energy and chakra that was above average because his clan had given him great levels of vitality and stamina. But that was enhanced by the Kyuubi's now purified chakra, which gave him exceptional physical prowess, peak health, and healing speeds. Although he was still susceptible to dying from old age or extremely deadly wounds, this made him nearly immortal in certain situations. All of this made him the Immortal Orange Hokage, a title that would not go away regardless of what he said about it. Of course, there was a cost associated with each advantage. When his friends and family died, Naruto would still be there because he had aged more slowly than they had for the many years that he ruled. This was a challenge for the blonde Sannin and Hokage, but he never let his mind wander and lived life to the fullest, so he had no regrets about existing. The Hokage felt a great deal of pride in the fact that his clan had expanded. He had many children and grandchildren, and was now one of the most well-known clans in the rebuilt village of Konoha. He knew that his apprentice's father, uncle, and grandfather would be proud when the time came to officially bestow the title of Hokage on his lone apprentice, who had shown himself to be a great warrior and a great man. In his opinion, it was time to hand the torch over to the following generation, or, in his case, the upcoming one. It was past time for someone else to ascend to the position of Kage because he realized that his time had come. Although he still looked young, he was already approaching retirement age, so it would be improper for him to claim all the glory for himself. He wasn't the type of person who did such things or thought in such ways. In the Tower of Hokage, as the Hokage gave him the symbolic hat that symbolized the rank of Kage, Konohamaru turned to face Naruto, the grandson of Hiruzen Sarutobi, who is now ranked as a Jonin, gazed sorrowfully at the hat before turning to face his old teacher. "Are you sure about this, boss? Why are you asking me that question? You've wanted to be Hokage yourself, right? And you've worked hard to be the right man for the job, Konohamaru. But still, you're the immortal Orange Hokage, boss. There's no way I can ever surpass you." Naruto answered sharply. "Don't think like that. Being Hokage is not about being famous or recognized all the time, Konohamaru. You have a duty and a responsibility towards the village of Konoha, as well as your family. Keep that and the will of fire in your mind always. Besides, it's your time to make your own legacy." The Jonin learned the valuable lesson of putting in a lot of effort to realize one's dreams. As he gazed at the man he had admired since their first meeting, grinning, he accepted the hat and answered, "I accept the position of Hokage, Hokage-sama." Naruto grinned and answered, "Good, and it's about time to use that title." Then another figure appeared, whom Naruto recognized instantly despite his elderly appearance. Although Ebisu remained the same, he had once again been a successful special trainer for a number of the village's brightest ninjas, since several of his kids had actually studied under Ebisu. Naruto was aware that this was the case. Then, with a tone of deep respect, the Jonin addressed Naruto. "I will do my best to help Konohamaru-san to achieve his dream and make a legacy he can be proud of, Hokage-sama. I have no doubt that you will. Now then, we have much to prepare, but for now, I need to take some time alone for myself." Naruto went to the new Uzumaki estate, which was empty for the day because his family had been very busy with their daily tasks in the village and their overseas assignments. They were all now spending the night in their bunks there. He walked to the cemetery and examined the tombstones. He looked at them all with some sadness. Among the reasons he felt a desire to transfer the leadership role was the names of the women he had been married to, who had now departed into the afterlife. He wasn't exactly a coward, but he needed some alone time because he had accomplished so much and had so many memories that he wanted to take a short vacation from them all. He fondly recollected all of his memories with the women he had married after falling in love with them as he examined each gravestone. The gravestones of Sakura, Temari, Hinata, Amaru, Shion, Koyuki, Toki, and Haruna were the first three he examined. He ran his hands over each stone's name as he gazed at them, recalling all the happy and sad moments as well as the pleasurable ones. Every woman added a different aspect of joy to his life, which he would always remember and cherish. Although there were ups and downs during those times, he would never trade those moments for anything in the world. Raising his children had been beneficial for both him and them. Many of his children would grow up to be highly skilled ninjas, but others would become daimyo, priests, or doctors. This helped the Uzumaki clan regain its fame and, in some respects, were thought to be nearly as strong as the renowned Senju clan of the past, despite the fact that they were also gifted in their sealing jutsu, which Naruto inherited from his father's and mother's sealed records. In addition to inheriting his father's signature kunai, Koyuki had a pair of swords made especially for him and a coat made that resembled his old one. And he was certain that the new generation of his clan would soon leave their mark on the world. He expressed his deepest wishes for their future endeavors. He accomplished this by giving the Toad summoning contract to his two oldest sons, Ryu, who was his firstborn son with Hinata, and Minato, who was his firstborn son with Sakura. He was confident that both of these sons would make excellent leaders and would be appointed as the new dual clan heads of their family. He felt a stir in the wind at that moment, so he swiftly turned and pulled out a kunai. Finding himself facing an unfamiliar face, the shadows obscured the person's appearance. "Who are you?" "So, you are the immortal Orange Hokage, the head of the newly rebuilt Uzumaki clan." Naruto glanced at the creature and narrowed his eyes before responding again. "I don't know who you are, but unless you start talking, I am going to assume you are a threat and I am going to deal with you right now." With a laugh, the figure answered, "Now that is hardly the way to speak to one of your own, young man, though I have to admit, you so resemble your mother in nature and attitude I should not be surprised." As he stared at the figure, Naruto's rage subsided, and he noticed a glow of some kind surrounding the figure, who then revealed himself, or rather, herself. The figure showed a woman who had seal tags in her hair, wore an ornate yet combat-ready kimono, and appeared to have a regal bearing. She had a majestic and strong demeanor. In addition to being stunning, she also exuded the aura of a ninja similar to him, albeit one that was very different yet recognizable. Since his mother Kushina had mentioned her and even shown her a picture of the woman in question, he was able to identify her fairly quickly. "Why, you're Mito Uzumaki, the first Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, and..." Mito finished for the astonished blonde Hokage, grinning. "Wife of the first Hokage, and great-grand aunt of your mother Kushina. It is a pleasure to finally meet my dear nephew in person, even though I'm not exactly alive to begin with. Ironically, for a man who had encountered so many dangers at such a young age while still a genin, Naruto's fear of ghosts or the supernatural persisted despite his age and experience. Why you're a ghost? Not exactly, it's true that I am dead, but I am not bound here to the world of the living like ghosts. I came here to speak to you in person. About what? About your desire to stand down as Hokage, or rather the feeling you have in you. For some time you've accomplished so much in your time. You have accomplished your dreams and you have managed to bring the dreams of your godfather to reality. Now, you feel lost, as if you were alive without direction, or am I wrong, young one? After remaining silent, Naruto responded, yeah, I've accomplished my dream of being Hokage, brought the dream of peace of the pervy sage, and even have such a family now, but I do feel kind of empty. It's not bad, but it is there still. That is to be expected. You have accomplished your destiny after all and you have lived your life fully. I guess you can call what you are feeling a crisis of purpose. It happens to those who have accomplished much in their lives. They had done so many things that they have developed a desire to do more good things. In other words, you're bored. But that's strange, isn't it? I mean, I've been bored before, but I never felt bored like this before. True, but it is there nonetheless. You craved challenges all your life, Naruto. You strived to succeed in everything to reach your dreams. But now that you've done it all and you've accomplished them, you feel as if there is nothing left for you. Normally this would not be a problem, but I believe that you feel this way since there are no longer reasons for you to grow stronger, and with the fact that you are still young due to the clan's vitality and stamina and the Kyuubi's now purified chakra in you. Naruto nodded, acknowledging that Mito did make sense and that he felt somewhat empty now that he had achieved his goals and had no more threats to test him. He didn't regret anything or everything he had done in his life. In fact, he would never change a thing he had done, even if he had the chance. Nevertheless, he felt empty. And because of his clan's gifts of vitality and endurance, he was somewhat immortal. Time seemed to pass so slowly to him that he felt as though he would never grow up. Then Mito grinned, however, I have something of a proposal. Your destiny here in this world, your duty here is over, and you have so much potential left to use, so how about aiding another would-be hero to save his own world from the flames of war and tyranny? That confused Naruto, who made it pretty clear to Mito. What do you mean by that? The kunoichi turned and grinned when a different figure emerged. This ghost, in contrast to his great aunt, was dressed very differently. He wore red robes with black lining. He was wearing blue fabric armbands in addition to his long white beard. He had white hair and a crown of some kind on his head. This spirit was not to be taken lightly when angry, as the blonde shinobi was further informed by the glowing blue-white eyes and the noticeable signs of aging on his face. Then Naruto addressed the newcomer. And you are? I am Avatar Roku, formerly of the Fire Nation. I have some things to discuss with you. Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki. The two spirits and the head of the Uzumaki clan debated for 2 hours before Naruto sat down, looked at Mito and Roku, and spoke gravely. So let me see if I get this all right. There's another world where there are the 4 groups of benders that Avatar Roku is part of. The first is the Water Tribes, the Air Nomads, the Earth Kingdom, and the Fire Nation. And for the past generations, there is one being known as the Avatar who can command the 4 elements to keep the peace between the 4 and maintain the balance of the world. As Naruto continued to summarize what he had learned so far, the two nodded. But then the Fire Nation started a war of conquest to control the world and defeat all the other benders. Their leader betrayed you, Avatar Roku, even though you and him were friends and you spared his life before and afterwards. He hunted down the Air Nomads since the new Avatar was to be born among them. He then directed his war with the Water Tribes and the Earth Kingdom and waged war with them, but spent a large portion of his life hunting down the Avatar. And now, after 100 years since the war started, the new Avatar, who incidentally is the last of the Air Nomads, was found by a pair of Water Tribesmen, and now he has to learn all the elements and bend them in order to defeat the Fire Lord before he uses this Sozin's Comet to conquer all the lands. Did I get it all right? Roku gave a nod. Yes, that is the current situation in my world, Naruto Uzumaki. Okay, so now we get to the part on why is it you are asking for my help. Correct me if I am wrong, but you and the other previous avatars can help him, right? That is true, but time is against us in our world. He has but a few months in order to master the 4 elements, and with the Fire Nation's war spreading out day by day, Aang's time to learn fire bending, water bending, and earth bending is limited. He will need all the help he can get in order to be alive long enough to learn all of these before the final phase of the invasion, and we cannot intervene directly, we can only support him. Another reason is that while he is capable, he is still a young boy who has to deal with the burden of being the savior of the world. Even though he will find friends and allies, he will still face a hard life and he will feel the weight of such a responsibility to the world. Unlike the other avatars, including myself, who have grown used to such responsibility, He has not and needs guidance. You have carried many burdens all your life and you have grown strong and never lost yourself in them. I have seen your life through the help of your aunt and I am sure that you can truly help the new avatar in handling some of these hurdles that he will soon face in his life. After giving it some serious thought, Naruto had to concede that Roku had a point. Sure, he wasn't exactly like this avatar, but he had a lot of responsibilities, including being the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki. As he grew older, he would have many more, but if he could save someone's world, at least he would be doing something completely worthwhile. In addition, he genuinely wanted to know what this new avatar could do. Okay, then I suppose that I can help if it is really that bad there in your world, Roku-san, but I do have one concern. Can I use my jutsu in your world? Because I won't be of much help if I have no way to use any of my jutsu. I can fight well, have my kenjutsu skills, and all the training I have since I was a child and a ninja, but it would not do well for me not to have my jutsu arsenal that can be very critical. At that, the former avatar nodded and answered. I understand your concerns. Rest assured that you can indeed perform your jutsu and summon your toad allies as well in battle. As for your resident, you have little to fear from it as you have defeated it in combat and its power is now yours. Alright then, so when are we supposed to go to your world, Roku-san? The two spirits grinned when Mito responded that Naruto was willing to assist the avatar at this hour. After you leave Konoha, head for the Valley of the End. There your path shall open. I have no doubt that you will be a good ally to the avatar in your travels with him. At that, Naruto grinned and answered, that remains to be seen. I will see you all later. Avatar Roku nodded and grinned a little because he thought the young man had a lot of strength and power. He hoped that by calling in an outsider, he would be able to help Aang with more than just the art of bending. Mito told him about her family line and the strongest member of the Uzumaki clan to date. When he met her while exploring the world of spirits there, he made the decision to approach Naruto and request his assistance in assisting Aang. It now appeared that Aang would have a worthy ally. As they dissipated, Naruto reflected on his recent agreement to enter another world and help this avatar rescue his own from the oppressive rule of this fire nation. Although it would have sounded strange, he imagined the trip would be fascinating now that he had met Roku and his aunt. In addition, it was past time for him to use his abilities in combat, and helping to prevent a world-destroying war seemed like a good way to test his mettle. His determination to assist this Aang in mastering the elements and finally facing the Fire Nation was strengthened by the knowledge that he would be assisting others. In light of the fact that he would be having a lengthy conversation with his family tomorrow, he entered the compound and went to bed. The following day, since one of their own was going to depart, a sizable crowd gathered at the gates of Konoha. In fact, the entire village was present, including both civilians and ninja. Young and old Naruto appeared in front of everyone, fully clothed, armed, and prepared to embark on his own journey. He also said goodbye to his former council, who wished him well. Even though he prayed to Tsunade and Shizune, who were already dead, he wished that his adopted grandma could finally be content with her loved ones, including Jiraiya in heaven, as he missed her. Many villagers used to be enraged and resentful of Naruto's status as the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, and they would have delighted in seeing him leave their village. Now that the demon fox was out of their village, they would have celebrated in private as much as possible throughout the entire village that night. So many years ago, the death of the beloved fourth Hokage and his wife, as well as countless sons, grandsons, daughters, granddaughters, sisters, brothers, and parents, served as a reminder of all the lives lost. But at that time, following Naruto's lengthy and successful reign as the Immortal Orange Hokage, the mood was one of melancholy rather than celebration. Many of the village elders had lived through the invasion of pain. They all recalled how the deceased Akatsuki leader had destroyed the village and killed a great number of their people, and how Naruto had defeated him in the Fourth Shinobi War along with Madara and Sasuke. He was going to leave the village forever, which saddened them. Some people asked him if he was going to become a missing ninja, to which he replied that he was just going to tour the world before dying. Both they and Naruto found this difficult, but eventually he said goodbye to them all and told the younger ninjas there, those he had witnessed mature into admirable adults, that the future now rested with them and he wished them to continue to burn the will of fire for as long as they could. A large number of them pledged to their former Hokage that they would honor that commitment regardless of the consequences. Feeling that they meant it, he bid them all farewell as soon as he was ready, wearing his own long coat from his fight with pain, his swords on his back, his regular and special kunai, spare clothes, scrolls, shuriken, and anything else he might need for this new task. While doing so, Naruto glanced again at the rebuilt village, the people in the gate, and the village from before. He recognized all of his friends who had died, even though he knew they were long gone, but he saw them waving goodbye, as well as the people he had looked after in his younger years. He waved to them all one last time before heading out. He visited the remaining lands that he believed he could see in the time allotted to him, which included the village of Suna, the village where Amaru used to reside, the land of snow, spring, the land of vegetables, the land of demons, and the land of birds. He had pleasant memories of every place he had visited on numerous occasions, and he vowed never to forget the things he had done there. After finishing, he traveled to the Valley of the End, which had been altered by the conflict between him and Sasuke years prior, and he could still clearly recall the events that had taken place there. Knowing full well what the man had done to so many people for his own ambitions to rule the world and the price he paid to stop him and permanently destroy his plans, he gazed at the statue of Madara and gave him a gloomy glare. After examining the damage that had occurred in the valley, he focused on one area. He sighed as he stood there in that one spot, remembering the exact moment he and Sasuke used both Rasengan and Chidori on each other, knowing full well where they were headed. "I see you've made it, Naruto." When Naruto turned around, he saw Mito grinning softly at him. Her aura and power remained the same, but he could understand why the people of her era adored her. When Avatar Roku finally arrived, the former living Kunoichi, the first Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, and the first Hokage's wife, set aside her admiration for her nephew and marveled at the transformation and growth of her lineage. Naruto spoke after giving them a nod. "I am ready to go and help Aang, but I do have ask, how exactly am I going to recognize him anyway? I don't exactly have any idea on what he looks like." To that, Avatar Roku responded, "He wears the traditional robes of the airbenders, which is orange and light yellow. It is easy to recognize him now that you what he wears. He also has several arrow tattoos on his body to show his status as an airbender master, and he carried a glider staff as well." That made Naruto grin. "He wears orange, huh? I like what I'm hearing. Anything else?" With a slight smile, the former Avatar answered, "Nothing at the moment, you best hurry." He and his companions are currently on the island of Kyoshi, named after another Avatar who was a female earthbender in her time. They are currently under attack by the Fire Nation. If you face them, be careful not to harm their leader, one Prince Zuko. At that, the blonde Sannin arched an eyebrow and answered, "I take there's a reason for that. He has a destiny before him, undecided as of yet. No matter what happens, he must not die for any reason. He is conflicted. Of that you will no doubt see for yourself. But he will prove to be an asset to Aang. When that will occur, I cannot say." Mito and Roku both summoned their respective powers as Naruto sighed and prepared himself, and soon a portal appeared in front of the blonde ninja. Knowing that his world would be in capable hands, Naruto turned to gaze at it once more and grinned broadly. After that, he entered the portal and prepared to meet Aang, an avatar. After passing through the portal and emerging into a forest of some kind, Naruto was immediately able to detect the sounds of fighting and burning wood because he had spent the previous 40 years honing his senses. As he approached the scene of the conflict, he was able to sense that a battle was taking place. "I've only been in this new world for a second, and already I'm in the middle of a battle. Damn, I must be lucky today." After leaving, the blonde made her way through the forest and into a village where it appeared that someone had completely forgotten to prevent the children from playing with combustible objects. The quantity of red and black-clad soldiers wearing masks and helmets, shooting flames from their hands and feet while brandishing a variety of weapons, and the fact that they were all tearing up the area were the only signs that a battle was taking place. Fire Nation soldiers. That's firebending, huh? It might be helpful back home because they don't use hand seals, but it's terrible because there isn't much flexibility and you can't mold fire to suit your needs. Then he saw the women with the fans, the strange but regal-looking crowns, the kimonos, the armor, and the face paint. If he didn't know any better, these women would have looked like they were from a play back home. However, the blonde was able to continue moving forward and sought out this man named Aang because he was his main responsibility. The sooner he located him, the better, given that Aang was the only person in this crowd of people wearing those orange and yellow hues. Naruto quickly identified him. After giving the young man a disbelieving look for a few seconds, Naruto expressed his opinions. "That's the Avatar. He looks about as intimidating as a bunny rabbit." Naturally, he knew not to judge by appearances alone after learning everything he could from Roku about the Avatar's abilities, skills that were still dormant in him, and his capacity for quick learning. That belief was further strengthened during his tenure as Hokage, which is why he chose to concentrate on more pressing issues, such as attempting to keep this child alive long enough to fulfill his obligation to save his world before the entire village he had arrived in was reduced to charcoal. He hurried to the battle zone ahead of him and dealt with the Fire Nation soldiers. The blonde took out multiple shuriken and stapled the fighters to the walls in the area, shocking the Fire Nation soldiers and the Kyoshi warriors they were battling with. The closest Fire Nation soldiers were unaware of what had happened. They turned to see Naruto in front of them, the blonde pulling both swords from his back and attacking the other Fire Nation fighters while donning a pair of gloves with metal guards on top. When one of the ninjas on his mount attempted to run the blonde through with his spear, the ninja reacted quickly, flipping the weapon, cutting it in half, and then jumping off the mount's tail while kicking 2 more people in the face before they could attack him. He engages 3 more in combat, swiftly stabbing and slashing to throw them off balance. Before dispatching them, he set one of his swords aside and then noticed Aang ostensibly engaged in combat with a highly skilled fighter who was undoubtedly a firebender. After Naruto took his position, he heard a Fire Nation soldier yelling, "Prince Zuko! We have a new threat." In response to that call, the man Aang was battling informed Naruto right away that it was Zuko. The blonde was struck by the prince's intense emotion in his movements and fighting style with Aang. The moment he saw the young man's scarred face and the fire in his eyes, he could only think of one person who had ever engaged in combat like Zuko: Sasuke. Even though he didn't think it was possible, Zuko's fighting style and behavior were exactly like those of his old friend Sasuke before he was corrupted by Orochimaru and eventually returned to his former self, the man he had fought with so many years ago. Anger was the main emotion that stirred inside of him, but he quickly suppressed it and concentrated on what Roku had told him about Zuko and his as yet undiscovered role in the world. He had to keep his mind on the task at hand, regardless of his feelings about seeing someone who made him think of his old friend. After rapidly focusing his chakra, he released a chakra chain from his arm and wrapped it around the prince's waist. As Aang and Suki noticed the chakra chain abruptly looping around Zuko's waist, the fighting pair was completely taken aback by its sudden appearance. The holder of the glowing chain was seen leaping towards Aang and company and revealing himself to the Fire Nation prince and the group of Aang after he was abruptly dragged away from Aang, leaving Zuko stunned by what had suddenly grabbed him by the waist. The man was taller than the others, wearing a long, short-sleeved coat with black flames around the edges and red as the primary color. He wore gloves with metal guards and carried a single-edged sword in one hand. In addition to wearing black and orange, he had a headband with a metal plate and a symbol that looked like a leaf. In addition, he wore a vest that had metal stitching, resembling an armored vest. The same could be said for the armor he was wearing. The man also had blonde hair, which is completely unheard of in this world, blue eyes, and strange whisker marks that gave him a unique appearance without being unattractive. In order to confront this new threat, Zuko was able to get up and take a defensive stance, but he couldn't help but wonder who this unexpected threat was and what weapon he had just used against him. "Who are you?" In response, Naruto swiftly set down his sword and performed a series of hand seals to call forth one of his patented jutsus. "Someone who's not going to let you have your way with the Avatar Prince Zuko. Now then, take this." Futon. Bakuretsu Nami. In front of Naruto, a huge ball of air appeared out of nowhere and burst like a wave, sending Zuko hurtling backwards into a nearby storage shed. Naruto quickly pulled out both swords, channeled his chakra into them, and watched as they glowed. Then, as the wind blew across the swords, he attacked the shed's support struts, feeling his elemental affinity take over. Futon. Sabama te ru kirite. The front end of the shed collapsed as the wind swiftly destroyed the support struts and flew from the sword slashes. Although it would take some time for the prince to get out of the wreckage, Naruto was confident that Zuko would be alright. He turned to Aang and sheathed both swords. One of the women, however, put her war fans next to his face before he could do so, indicating that she would attack if he attempted any action that would be interpreted as hostile. "Hey, is that really necessary?" "Depends. Who are you and how did you get here?" Naruto answered, shaking his head. "Look, normally I wouldn't mind a conversation, but we're in the middle of a village under attack and I have to keep the Avatar here from prematurely heading off to the spirit world since one of his previous selves asked me to." Aang was shocked by that and turned to face the man. He was clearly not from anywhere he was aware of because the man's golden hue was almost unheard of in any place he was aware of. The Avatar was even more perplexed by the fact that he had used air to battle Zuko, despite the fact that he did not have the same tattoos or attire as an airbender, and no airbender used air in that way, much less produce glowing energy chains and wield swords. Then he remembered that one of his former selves had asked the man to keep him alive. Suki glanced at the man who, for some reason, seemed worried about Aang. Despite his air-using skills, he didn't bend like Aang did. Katara appeared and spoke at that moment. "Aang, we've got to leave. If we leave, then Zuko and his soldiers might." After noticing the flame patterns on Naruto's coat, Katara assumed a defensive waterbending stance and started talking. "Aang, Suki, get away from him." Then, Aang intervened and prevented Katara from applying her waterbending abilities to the newcomer. "Wait, Katara. Stop. It's all right. He's not with the Fire Nation. He's an airbender like me." At that, Katara let out a gasp. "He's an airbender?" When Naruto became frustrated, he spoke up. "Now is not the time. Let's move out of here already. I managed to pin down old Scarface earlier, but he will get out, and if we don't lure him away from here, I can bet he would have this place turned into a mass of charcoal." After gathering her thoughts, Katara nodded. He's right, Aang. If we stay here any longer, Zuko and his soldiers will torch this entire village to find us. If we leave, then they will follow us and leave the villagers of Kyoshi Island alone. Then Aang answered, I know, but all this was my fault. If I hadn't guided us here just to have fun for a while, then no one here in Kyoshi would have been targets of the Fire Nation at all. I have to do something to make amends for what I did. Although he had to remind himself that neither he nor Aang were particularly young, Naruto observed that at least the child had his act together and his heart in the right place. The man was approximately 111 years old, and although he appeared to be in his mid to late 20s, he was already approaching 60 according to the last count. He should have been 12. Then he gave a serious response to that. Listen, Aang, you won't be able to do anything unless you are alive to do it. Get some distance and make your move once you have a chance to think clearly. Then Suki answered, he's right, Aang. You have to get out quickly while my warriors and me buy you time to make your move. You can't do much here if you get yourself killed. Later on, after the Avatar used the enormous unagi to extinguish the fire that Zuko's soldiers had started earlier, Aang and the others were now departing Kyoshi Island. Thankfully, the people of Kyoshi Island were saved, making it a risky gamble that paid off earlier. When he joined them, Sokka had succeeded in getting a kiss from Suki similar to Katara. He pulled out his boomerang upon seeing Naruto, but Aang also stopped him. Naruto responded that blaming himself for what happened would not solve anything. Instead, he should save the people there and make the most of it. This was after they had left the area and Katara had attempted to assist Aang in dealing with what he still believed to be his fault. This resulted in the unagi riding incident, which elevated Aang's standing in Naruto's perspective. This was demonstrated as soon as Aang returned and Katara gave him a joyful embrace while the blonde shinobi conversed with the young avatar. You've got some serious guts to ride the creature, Aang. You've just won yourself some brownie points on my scorecard. I can see why Avatar Roku wanted me to keep any eye on you until you master the 4 elements as the new avatar. Sokka responded after glancing at the blonde man in front of him. You want to tell us who you were first, Goldenhead? Goldenhead, huh? That's an odd name to call me, you skirt and face paint wearing dude. What's with the idea of wearing Kyoshi warrior garb? I thought you were a water tribe member or something. I am. I was just trying to make up for looking down on them the first time I met them, namely Suki. At that, Naruto smiled and answered, really? I take it that kiss I saw you two share was her way of accepting your apology, huh? Sokka let out a gasp and gazed at Naruto in shock. USAW that? Yeah, you're pretty lucky that you got a kiss instead of a slap there. I can wager a guess she's got the hots for you too. Shame she didn't want to join us in this trip. I saw her fight earlier before I dealt with Scarface earlier. She's got some killer moves. Sokka paused and scowled at Naruto just as he was about to respond in agreement. Don't get any ideas about Suki. At that, Naruto smiled and answered. Relax, I think she's got eyes only for you, and I'm not the kind of guy who gets between two lovebirds. I'm not that crazy right now, so I can bet you guys have some questions for me? Aang spoke and nodded. I do. How did you use air against Zuko like that? It's called an elemental jutsu. It allows me to use my elemental affinity chakra as a form of attack when I need it, as well as defense, though I guess that unlike you Avatar, I don't bend the elements. Sokka gave Naruto a perplexed look. Hold it, I thought Aang was the last of the air nomads. How can you bend air? At that, Katara spoke and shook her head. He's not an airbender, Sokka. Airbenders don't dress like him, nor do they carry weapons like that, nor do they have golden hair, blue eyes, and whisker marks, not to mention he's got none of the tattoos that Aang has. Good point. At that, Naruto shook his head and answered. Would you two please not talk like I'm not here? I do have ears, you know. If you want to know who I am, then ask me. That embarrassed the three a little, so Aang chose to talk first. Sorry, so, what is your name? The name's Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki. I am a former Hokage of Konoha, a Sannin, and one of the Jinchuriki. Then Sokka inquired, what does Hokage mean anyway? It's a title given to the strongest ninja of the village. Before you react, I want to make it clear that I am not from the Fire Nation and I am no firebender. The title of Hokage translates to Fire Shadow since my village is in the land of fire. That made Sokka and Katara tense, and they didn't start to relax until Aang started talking. I think he's right, guys. He didn't use any firebending when he fought with Zuko earlier, and I know that no person in the Fire Nation wears clothes like he does. The fact that there is no person in the Fire Nation who had blue eyes and gold hair kind of adds weight to what he said that he's no firebender. So what does Sannin mean? Sannin means sage ninja or ninja sage. It's a title given to ninja who are at the level of Kage. I inherited the title after the previous holder, who was my teacher, and godfather died in combat. It's a sore subject that I don't plan on sharing yet, okay? Sokka and Katara nodded and took a small step back. They were both familiar with the pain of losing loved ones. Especially Katara, having lost everyone he knew when they arrived at the Air Nomad Temple and discovered that all of the nomads were dead and gone. Aang experienced the same emotions then. Hoping for more answers, he spoke to Naruto again. I wanted to ask this last one, how do you know Avatar Roku? Naruto smiled and answered. That is going to be a very long story. I hope you guys don't mind, and once it's over, try not to be shocked about what you learned about where I come from, what I can do, and who I really am. Within the ship, WHO was he. In an attempt to understand the mystery of the newcomer who had just employed an unheard of type of airbending, Zuko paced back and forth. Iroh answered his nephew after taking a slow sip of his tea. Calm yourself, Prince Zuko. This new arrival is a mystery indeed, since from what you have described I have my doubts that he is an airbender, as there are no longer any of them around with the exception of the Avatar. However, he managed to use Air Uncle. That's something only airbenders can do. However, you witnessed for yourself that he does not fight like a Zuko. No airbender has golden hair, blue eyes, and a similar style of dress. They also have tattoos, and what's even more telling is that they carry swords and use airbending as a full-scale offensive style. Only a small percentage of air nomads use airbending aggressively, despite their considerable ability to do so. Furthermore, no airbender in history has been able to use energy chains as of yet. Zuko nodded, understanding that his uncle was correct. The man who had attacked him was not an airbender. But how could he use air in such a manner if he wasn't? What were the hand gestures he had previously used? He paused, turned to face his uncle, and spoke. How am I going to handle his new friend, uncle? I don't intend to give up on capturing the Avatar so I can return home. Slowly, Zuko, keep in mind that you need to drink the tea slowly so that your tongue can adjust to the heat and flavor without burning. The same is true of this new individual. After giving those words some thought, Zuko made the decision to give it some thought because this new individual was an unknown factor that required careful consideration. Naruto took another look around the place before talking to the others about what they were currently looking at, though the blonde was focusing more on the young, bald, and tattooed youth than the other two because he had originally suggested that they come here. So Omashu is the city in the mountains ahead of us? Aang nodded and grinned at the city as Katara and Sokka arrived in Omashu. It had been a while since he had visited the city, at least a century ago, when he spent time with his old friend Bumi, a wild-eyed, red-haired child with whom he was always hanging out. He recalled the wildly unusual ways his friend would think and act, which is why he referred to Bumi as a mad genius. Yes, I haven't been here in a while, but at least not much has changed since then. I had some really interesting times in Omashu with my old friend Bumi, who lived here. Katara expressed her amazement and grinned at the scene. Those houses look so different from those back home. In his own words, Sokka summed that up quite nicely. Why don't they melt in the sunlight? Since the waterbenders lived in the world's poles, which translates to the coldest places on Earth, it would make sense that they lived in igloos and the like. Naruto would have looked at the two siblings and asked what they were talking about, but he remembered what he had learned from Avatar Roku about them. Naruto found it difficult to imagine that he had not visited the poles himself on multiple occasions back in his world. The reason he and a team were sent to deal with them was because some renegade ninja forces were causing some sort of trouble for Koyuki's home, and she was busy with things like rebuilding and dedicating her forces. For this reason, he had winter clothes in that mission, just like before, but much thicker. Since there was still some distance between them and the city gates, Sokka chose to speak with Aang as they prepared to enter the city. With Aang leading the way, Naruto was ostensibly occupied with retrieving a book from one of his pouches. Are you certain we can trust him, Aang? After a moment of confusion, Aang focused on Sokka's expression and noticed that Naruto was writing something in his book. I do? You might want to explain to me why. I mean, he's not exactly from around here and I still get the feeling he's hiding something from us. As he thought back to their previous discussion with Naruto after they had left Kyoshi Island, Aang had to concede that Sokka was right. A flashback. The blonde started to explain some of the things that would at least explain his presence as they flew over the sea and headed for a safer location. In fact, one of these conversations had made the two siblings much more serious about the blonde. Are you an assassin? In response to Sokka's query, Naruto nodded. Yeah, I was trained as an assassin, but I have only killed 2 in my life and they deserved it. Aang made it clear to Naruto that, despite being an airbender, he was a pacifist by virtue of his upbringing and values, which did not please him in the least. Why did you kill them and why did you say they deserved to die? With a sigh, Naruto answered the query. They were both ruthless criminals who could not be persuaded otherwise. The first had no problem not only killing but also experimenting on the dead, and he had no problem defiling and reviving the dead when you consider that he had received healing training but used those abilities to murder people and carry out more research. It didn't make matters any simpler. At this point, Katara's expression was less than joyful as she spoke. How did you feel about the other person you killed? He was none other than Uchiha Madara, and Naruto sighed because he knew that man very well and knew that nothing he said would change his mind when he fought him. The man was a terrorist and a criminal of the highest order, so no matter how hard he tried, nothing would change his way of thinking, and the fact that he was willing to do what he wanted at the expense of everyone else made killing him worthwhile. The man was more of a monster. Imagine the worst aspects of humanity combined into one man, and it would be illegal to call him a man. He did a great deal of terrible things to me and a great number of other people. He actually initiated what is now known as the Fourth Great Shinobi War along with other ninja forces from all over the world. Many of my friends risked their lives to fight him and his dark army. We prevailed, but many lives were lost because of one man who was unable to let go of his hatred and desire to rule the world. Furthermore, based on my knowledge of this Fire Lord, he is identical to the person I killed. After a few moments of silence, Naruto answered, I do not relish taking life, even if I am trained to take life, but those two, they had to be stopped, and at least I never took any pleasure in my actions. If I did, then I am no different than them. At this point, Katara remained silent, and then Aang spoke. So you are the leader of your village? Former leader. Actually, I retired recently and was contacted by Roku, and here I am. Let's just say that my meeting with him was rather unusual. After a long period of silence, Sokka finally spoke. So why are you saying that you were sent here by an avatar named Roku? I may not love the Fire Nation and any news from them is not welcome to me, but why would he ask for your help, and isn't he supposed to be dead? Naruto answered, shaking his head, all I know is that Roku asked me to help keep Aang alive, and believe me, I was not really happy with the idea of being asked by a ghost to do this. I just had this dislike for ghosts, but since he was asking me and I was convinced to help him by a relative of mine, I agreed. I gave the position of Hokage to a very good man who I was friends with and had more than enough to qualifications to be Hokage in my place, and after some time, I came to Kyoshi Island, and you guys know the rest. At this point, Sokka remained silent while he and his friends observed their new travel companion. The eldest of the three was certain that the blonde man was concealing something. Katara might label him paranoid, but he had no intention of breaking this habit. In light of this, he made the decision to inquire once more about any additional information he might be concealing. So why send you alone? At that, Naruto arched an eyebrow because he could see where this was going. Why? You thought Aang was going to get a team of ninja to protect him? He is the Avatar after all, Naruto answered, shaking his head. Haven't you been listening? Being a Kage means you are one of the strongest ninja in the village. They don't just give you the title. You have to show that you are worthy, and you have to earn the right to be even considered Kage material. So a Kage level ninja is the best ninja around, with some exceptions. In addition, I've been trained in Senjutsu, Summoning Jutsu, Collaboration Jutsu, Nature Manipulation, my mother's clan's Fuinjutsu techniques, my father's 2 signature jutsu, and I know how to use old furball. Besides that, having a large force is going to attract attention. Ninja teams always work in teams of 4, a Jonin leader and 3 Genin or Chunin, you know, and sometimes one of them would be a medic nin. After that, Katara spoke. A what? A ninja trained on medical techniques, like a field doctor is the best way to put it, and though they are not allowed to fight since they are healers, there are some who can do so and even be poison masters as well if needed. Their knowledge of the body can even be used to kill better, but only if needed and when they have to fight back. A little taken aback, Sokka responded, a ninja who's a healer? I thought you were all assassins? We are, but we serve as spies, bodyguards, escorts, and more. It's the ones of us who are mercenaries or renegades who deserve a lot more scrutiny. Those guys wind up as being bandits, raiders, and worse. Most of us ninjas serve the leaders of our village who hands the missions, and we serve in the army when we need to. When called by the feudal lord of our land, we do usually get some rogues every now and then, so we have to deal with them anyway. Is there anything else you want to ask? Since she had met Naruto, Katara had a question, so she was the first to speak. She wanted to know how women were treated in his world. After learning that he was not from any of the 4 bending cultures, Katara was aware that it would seem strange to some, especially to her people, the water tribes. But she had always disapproved of gender stereotypes and thought it would be interesting to have someone from outside of the 4 bending cultures. What about the women where you come from? What do you mean by that, Katara-san? Are men the only ones who can become ninja? At that, Naruto arched an eyebrow and gave a small smile in response. No way, there is no such thing as gender lines when it concerns ninja. Both men and women in my homeland are allowed to train to become ninja. We call female ninja as kunoichi, and I have to say that some of the kunoichi are more dangerous than the men. Heck, before I took the role of Hokage, that title was held by Tsunade Senju. She was one of the original Sannin and considered as one of the strongest kunoichi in the world and one of the best healers. There were few sicknesses and wounds she could not cure, nor any poison she could eventually create an antidote for, and considering your potential skills, Katara-san, you would make a very skilled ninja yourself. Although Katara grinned at the idea that Naruto's origins were not gendered, she raised an eyebrow at that. If she had been able to go there herself, she would have enjoyed that if given the opportunity. The flashback is over at that. Aang nodded and answered. I can understand where you are coming from with that Sokka, but I still get the feeling we can trust him. How's that? The young airbender smiled sheepishly and fell silent for a while. I just do. I can't really explain why I do trust him despite what he might be hiding something from us. He does not send a bad feeling for me right now. At that, Katara nodded and answered. I have to agree with Aang on this one, Sokka. Besides, he must be hiding those things for a good reason. With a sigh, Sokka answered. Fine. I guess if you two trust him, then there's no reason for me to speak of it for now, but don't expect me to turn my back on him just yet. I still don't trust Golden Boy. At that moment, Naruto spoke in a deep voice directly behind him. I can hear you very clearly, Sokka. You think my ears are just for show? At that, Sokka leapt and spun around, drawing his club and boomerang in preparation for a fight based only on instinct. He was amazed at how easily the blonde had been able to sneak up on him when he noticed Naruto smiling at him. How the heck did you do that? With a chuckle, Naruto answered. I'm a ninja, remember? I can be very sneaky when I need to be anyway. I think I need to change clothes. Wearing my long coat is going to attract attention, so if you will excuse me. Then, although he enjoyed dressing in his more conventional attire, Naruto knew that he occasionally needed to blend in, so he moved to a nearby pile of rocks and opened a scroll he had with him. For this reason, whenever he felt that a mission called for him to be out of uniform and out of sight, he always carried a change of clothes. The outfit consisted of a basic gray long-sleeved shirt, a Chunin vest he made himself, armored with premium thick leather and specially crafted sheets of thin but sturdy metal. Since he was not an Anbu member and was exempt from wearing the required uniform, he had this made in his later years. After rising to the rank of Jonin, he added a pair of forearm guards made of the same materials but covered in gray cloth underneath. Additionally, he switched his pants from black to orange to white. Even though he kept his forehead guard, he was complete with this and a pair of leg guards that matched the color of his new attire. Aang, Sokka, and Katara were observing him when he joined the others. When he occasionally changed his clothes, the people back in Konoha gave him that look naturally. Aang had something to say about that. Why do you change clothes, Naruto? Wearing red and black as well as orange might draw attention, and if the Earth Kingdom, as you said, is at war with the Fire Nation, then seeing me in red and black might attract attention, namely the hostile kind of attention, right? At that, Katara also nodded and answered. He has a point. Since we all know the Fire Nation soldiers use those colors a lot, the only thing we need to worry about now is how to hide Aang. Sokka answered. That, is that really needed? You'll never know. There might be real trouble and we don't want that force of Fire Nation soldiers finding us, do we? So how exactly are we going to disguise Aang? Huh? Why would I need a disguise? Aang asked, and Katara answered. It might be a bad idea for people to find out you're the Avatar Aang, so we do need to disguise you. And how can we do that? Have me grow a mustache or something? After some time, they eventually used some of Appa's fur to create a mustache and wig for Aang to wear. Aang only needed to appear elderly and run down to get past Naruto, who was making a concerted effort not to laugh at his appearance. When Aang started complaining of itching and even questioned how Appa could live this way, it became more difficult to resist that urge. Since there was nowhere in the city for the air bison to land, they knew it was a bad idea to bring Appa. Naruto couldn't help but laugh to himself as he observed the three children he was traveling with as they made their way toward Omashu. Given that he appeared to be only a few years older than they were, that statement might have seemed strange, but his actual age already made him a very old man. He was literally on ice for that to occur, but if what they said about finding Aang in that iceberg was accurate, then he was way older than him. Because he had taken the time to acclimate himself to them and learn what he could, he was already able to formulate thoughts regarding the three. In addition to his airbending skills and other abilities, Roku had previously spoken with the ghost and said that Aang was different and rather funny. He was fun-loving and had a serious sense of humor. However, Roku also mentioned that his other bending skills required a lot of work because he needed to master the others. Additionally, he had to give the young man credit for his non-killing stance because it somewhat mirrored his own. He had no doubts that Aang would be put to the test, though, and he already knew that killing was sometimes necessary depending on who he was fighting with and if there was no other option. He also believed that Aang would be put to the test in spite of his character and upbringing, so he would need to be prepared for that. Since it was not the best thing to happen, all he could hope was that Aang did not allow it to consume him. Naruto also had to respect the fact that he was the Avatar and had the mission to save the world even though he might not express it to others. He could tell that Aang was quite insecure about his fate as an Avatar, and the fact that he was a man barely in his teens only made the situation worse. It was somewhat like how he had been when he was the Jinchuriki and had to cope with how people perceived him for the majority of his childhood. Other than their abilities and looks, he and Aang were identical except that Aang was viewed as a savior by the world, whereas he was viewed as the Kyuubi's jailer, and very few believed that he was one of Destiny's children, with Nagato being the other. In contrast to Aang, Naruto had spent his entire childhood being rejected and disregarded due to the Kyuubi that he possessed. In addition to the animosity that the public had toward him naturally, he was aware that many people were hurt during the Kyuubi attack when Madara took over, and that such injuries were difficult to forget. He was certain, though, that Aang's return would not be welcomed right away because he was aware that some people would despise him for not being there to support them during the war, and others might try to take advantage of him. He had met a lot of people who were like that, and although some of them had somewhat good reasons, others, in spite of their twisted reasoning, were not so selfless. His only wish was to prevent those individuals from pushing Aang over the edge or to his demise. Although he had not yet witnessed Aang fight, he already liked him and hoped for a strong performance. However, he was still unsure of how to perceive Aang in combat. He might even be able to spar with him to compare him to his longtime friends. In addition to being the group's mother figure and big sister, Katara was also quite attractive, with her blue eyes, tanned skin, and well-proportioned features. She would also have a body that would turn heads if given the chance, especially when she reached adulthood. She may be far too young for a man his own age, but he was certain that if he had met her when he was still in his teens, he would have given her more attention. Sakura would have undoubtedly scolded him for it the moment his ex-teammate and late wife caught him staring at Katara, and he knew she wouldn't be alone either. She was the only waterbender in the group, so she would be able to battle the elements aside from Aang. Although her skills weren't up to par, he was confident that she could make significant progress once she committed to her training, and he wasn't joking when he said that with enough time and training, she could become a great ninja on her own. Since he had seen Aang staring at Katara multiple times during the trip, he had no trouble figuring out that he had a serious crush on her. He had kept quiet because it was hardly his business, but the opportunity to playfully tease Aang if he caught him eyeing Katara when she wasn't looking was definitely alluring as far as he could tell. Katara was the first person he saw when he woke up from that iceberg, so he couldn't really blame Aang for his attraction to her. He was aware, though, that when things got really bad, Katara would not always be the kind and gentle girl she was at the moment. If Naruto had to learn this lesson the hard way, it was that sometimes the ostensibly nice women could be extremely dangerous when something was present that really got under their skin and made them angry. In fact, he was eager for Katara to reveal her wild and dangerous side because, after all, it was perfectly acceptable to occasionally have a darker side in life. In contrast, Sokka was humorous in his own right. Naruto could easily identify with the man's sense of humor and his strong sense of justice. His ability to make his own weapons by hand, which he did every day, demonstrated his intelligence, but he was incredibly lazy and probably required a lot of appropriate motivation to get going. However, he had no idea how far he would go once he found the motivation. Although Sokka had a sense of humor and could be viewed as a good, humorous man with a serious imagination, he did in some ways remind him of his old friend Shikamaru Nara. In contrast, Shikamaru was as irritable as a bag of dead fish, constantly complaining that things were difficult, and, in contrast to Sokka, didn't think girls were bad. Naruto was still in awe that Shikamaru even married the decoder woman in the Konoha archives. He would never be able to learn how she thought he was handsome and a potential husband. Naruto was certain that he would witness the full extent of Sokka's potential, which would eventually be revealed. Sokka was a warrior at heart, and although he lacked experience and skills, he undoubtedly had creativity, willpower, and inventiveness on his side, and if he had learned anything during his formative years, it was that those things can truly make a big difference in the world. Additionally, he had a gut feeling that Sokka would not be defeated easily and that, with the correct mentor, he would succeed greatly. Heck, if and when he had the opportunity, he might very well teach Sokka a few things as well. For the time being, though, he anticipated that Sokka would still have some trust issues with him despite his statements. He would need to be blind, deaf, or stupid to miss how much the two siblings cared for each other, even though they might quarrel and criticize one another. They were siblings, so it must have been difficult for them to lose their mother and then have their father move away. Even though they were a family, he pondered whether he would have been able to have a younger sibling if his parents had still been living. Being the oldest, he was certain that Sokka would do everything in his power to protect Katara, but he was also certain that Sokka would be keeping a close eye on any men who tried to court his sister. He pondered what might have happened if he had been in that predicament and had a younger sister that he had to look after, and she was also a very pretty woman. If he did have a younger sister, he would have been certain that he would have a great time. I can now imagine how Gaara would act when watching over his sister, regardless of the fact that Temari is the oldest of them. If my sister had been as attractive as our mother, I would have also been keeping a close eye on her. Katara turned to face him as the blonde laughed at the picture that caught her attention. What's so funny, Naruto? Oh, just thinking about something funny, Katara, nothing to be worried about. Sokka gave him a look and answered, you want to share in the humor? At that, Naruto shook his head, not today, Sokka. Anyway, how is Aang holding up? While Naruto had to acknowledge again that, given his height and stature, Aang could pass for an elderly man, the twitching of excitement about him was giving him the wrong signals. Even though the others seemed to be unaware of it, Sokka turned to show Aang moving around on his staff like an elderly man. Although the clouds were a bit excessive, he was still unsure about this location because Kumogakure was the only place that, in his mind, came close to Omashu because it was in the mountains. He seems to be enjoying himself already. To that, Aang turned and answered. Omashu is one of the friendliest cities I know. While Katara and Sokka grinned, Naruto just watched, his sense of danger already sharpened. Although this city might be friendly to Aang, he was not going to be careless about keeping himself prepared for anything. He was certain that Aang's recollection of the city would be different after being on ice for 100 years, even though he might find the city to be friendly. When they saw a cabbage vendor being given the 3rd degree by the guards, that line of reasoning was validated as they watched the guards. Naruto quickly had a remark to send to Aang after they drew closer to see exactly what was happening in front of them. If this is how friendly they are here in Omashu, Aang, I'd hate to see how they are when they get angry. Since the guards weren't acting this way when he was last here, Aang remained silent, also perplexed as to why they were acting this way. He didn't even recognize any of them. In fact, he only hoped that not much had changed since his last visit, when he realized that it had been a century since he had visited the city and that things must have changed in that time. They soon saw that the guards were not going to allow the man to sell rotten cabbages like those in the city of Omashu, so they bent the man's cart away and threw it into the gulf. When he saw his sole source of income being thrown into the ground, the merchant was understandably furious and let out a dejected shout. My cabbages! Naruto couldn't help but feel a certain amount of sympathy for the man, even though he knew that if he had been his younger self, he would have enjoyed him a little bit because, prior to keeping his word to his mother Kushina to eat more healthily, he detested a lot of vegetables and wasn't even interested in trying any of them. Soon after they continued their journey, the 4 of them were now being. Hold it right there, who are you and what brings you all here to the city of Omashu? Though he was certain that he would eventually be the next in line for the guard's interrogation, Naruto remained silent as he watched what Aang and the others would do. Even after one of the guards used earth bending to move a boulder over Aang's head and started berating the guard in front of him in an elderly man's voice, Aang moved quickly. That worried Sokka and Katara, but Naruto just arched an eyebrow and refrained from laughing. Aang eventually succeeded in persuading the guards to give Naruto the strangest name he had heard in a very long time. What is that kind of name? Regardless of how the name sounded, it appeared that it and Aang's actions were sufficient to persuade the guards that Aang was telling the truth. Indeed, he was addressed by one of the guards. And who are you, stranger? I've never seen anyone who looks in any possible way like you before in these parts of the Earth Kingdom. Naruto responded to that right away. My name is Tatsuki Hayashi. Aang picked things up quickly and also spoke alongside the guards. He's the son of a very old friend of mine and he came in the pleas of his grandfather, who is old like me, young man. So I suggest that you don't bother him and let him pass as well. All right, but make sure that you all are not going to wander about. We have a lot of things to do here in Omashu. Move along. When one of the guards abruptly stopped Sokka and grabbed him by the shoulder, they quickly became tense as they were moving. This alarmed Naruto, who was prepared to act if necessary, but the guard's subsequent words to Sokka were sufficient to put an end to that plan. You're a young and strong man, show some respect for our elders and carry your grandfather's bag. After Aang said that was a good idea, he threw Sokka his bag, and Naruto couldn't help but laugh at Sokka. That appeared to be funny to Katara, and based on the sparkle in his eyes, it appeared to be funny to Aang as well. The fact that they had just outwitted the Earth Kingdom guards made Naruto want to shake his head, but he forced that thought from his mind when he saw the gates of Omashu open. The gates were actually 3 enormous stone slabs, each at least 1.5 feet thick. He was impressed by that, and as he and the others entered, the scene in front of him gave the entire scene more significance. To the astonishment of the Earth Kingdom guard, who questioned whether prolonged exposure to the sun had impacted his vision, the guard was unaware that he had just seen Momo's ears emerge from Aang's wig. After they were on, Aang went into great detail about how Omashu's mail system operated overall, and Naruto had to concede that it was pretty inventive. However, he sensed that Aang and his friend Bumi, whoever was using this delivery system, were using it for more than just sending occasional messages when he noticed a smile on Aang's face. And the blonde thought that Aang was spot on when he described his intentions. Even though it seemed like a good idea and he didn't have a crippling fear of heights, Naruto had a bad feeling about it. However, after giving it some thought, he realized that riding down through a series of tunnels and stations in a cart of stone wasn't his way of enjoying the possibility that something might go wrong. Now that he and the others were in one of the stations, he was more than happy to make that line of thought clear. He was not entirely sure how they had gotten in here without drawing the guards' attention, but he was certain that they were in for it the moment they tried this plan. Not to sound like I'm trying to spoil your fun, Aang, but are you sure that this is a good idea? Aang nodded, and although it didn't help his mental state, Naruto forced himself not to slap himself at the ridiculous way Aang was smiling in response to his query. He now knew exactly how Iruka and the other Konoha ninja felt when he pulled their practical jokes, and they did everything in their power to stop him before he did something truly terrible. It is, once we're done here with one ride, we'll go to the North Pole. Normally I don't mind playing practical jokes, a trait I inherited from my mother, but it's not my idea of fun or a practical joke to ride down a cart of stone and either slap hard and become a smear on the city walls, houses, and other things, or to piss off an entire city for destroying their mail system. Then, as they ascended higher and higher, Katara answered that. It's going to be all right, Naruto, this might actually be fun. The fact that Katara smiled at that and that Aang appeared to enjoy seeing the Water Tribe girl smile confirmed Naruto's suspicions that Aang was attracted to Katara. However, he couldn't help but feel that Katara would eventually come to regret saying that. And when he saw the three of them walk away and Katara's sobs indicated that she was sorry for what she had said, Naruto was spot on. Then he noticed a spear-wielding cart trailing the group, and he realized that the fun had changed to danger following them quickly. The blonde used his chakra to provide traction for his feet so he could get to the cart. He quickly pushed the cart farther away if he could after using his chakra to hold onto it. However, it was insufficient to drive the spears away. Oh hell, duck Sokka. As several of the spears arrived, Naruto's warning was accurate. He had to move to the side and use the same training he had received to become proficient in Sage Mode to hold on while Katara was about to drop, and Sokka ducked. Aang spoke as soon as he realized what was going to happen. I'm on it. As Aang started to move the cart swiftly and sent them out of the spear cart's path, Naruto was grateful that his chakra control had improved. However, that also caused them to exit the tunnel and collide with multiple roofs. Sokka, Aang, and Katara turned to see how Naruto had managed to stand up and hold himself on the cart. How the heck are you doing that? Naruto gave a serious response. Now is not the time, Sokka. As they walked through the city on the roofs of houses, Aang was cheering away, and Naruto knew that the people living there would be furious. Their cart collided with a group of earthbenders, who were undoubtedly military personnel, and they would undoubtedly be the ones pursuing them after this fun ride was over. He stood over Sokka and positioned himself on the back of the cart as they soon landed on another tunnel, and things quickly became out of control. Then Katara called out to Aang, Aang, we need to move away from here. Use your airbending. Right. We can move much faster. When Aang's airbending move caused the cart to move even more quickly, Naruto responded with a hint of sarcasm. Great, going faster will really help us by turning us into a faster moving disaster. Given that the cart was now traveling at breakneck speeds, Naruto's remarks were spot on. After he grabbed something, Naruto was tempted to stop them by using his senjutsu to summon nature chakra. However, since doing so at this speed might propel them out and force them to crash into something, he shot that notion down, and given how quickly they were moving, it was likely that it would hurt, at least to him, as he was accustomed to it and could use his senjutsu to help him, but for Aang and the others, that was not an option. A cart was moved away by an earthbender, and they thought they had escaped disaster until they slammed through another area and the man made another one appear. As they reached another drop, they were smashed into it and flung away. Soon after, they were in the air, and Naruto realized that everything had truly gone wrong when he saw Aang use his airbending to lower the cart below them and slow it down long enough for them all to easily get back into it. Yet he chose to employ his mother's chakra chain method, forming a kunai blade on the end and using it to stab the cart and pull himself to it. He used his chakra to re-stick himself on the cart after he arrived and the others were inside. They quickly caused even more chaos in Omashu after their brief excursion, including smashing through a man's window and breaking the jar he was working on. Aang yelled at the man whose work they had destroyed as soon as they emerged from the other side. Sorry. I doubt that sorry is going to cut it, Aang. Naruto was pleased that he had managed to hang on as long as he could, but immediately after leaving the tunnel, They were sent through a building. When they emerged, he saw Momo struggle to keep from getting clawed up by a very whiskered cat-like creature, which the lemur pushed away. They were then sent down from a building's roof. He noticed a cart and the previous cabbage vendor when he looked down. How on earth did that guy manage to get his cabbage cart into the city? When the cart crashed and the man yelled at them, Naruto was too busy to ask that question aloud. My cabbages. Naruto could not resist talking to Aang, whose disguise was now a ragged mess and of little use for what they were about to encounter, as the guards surrounded them and pointed their weapons at them. I think we just wore out our welcome here. In the room of the throne, when Naruto looked at the king of Omashu, he couldn't help but feel a little uneasy around him. He had a strange face, hair that looked like two white pyramids protruding from the sides of his head, and the typical signs of old age. Despite his appearance, the blonde sensed that this king wasn't the type to be despised. Something about him was different. He might act like the quintessential loose cannon in the brain department, but he was aware that appearances can be deceiving. When the high-ranking officers asked Naruto what he would like done to them, he was even more intrigued by the king's subsequent statement that, after the merchant finished, he and the others were to be put to death. Who in their right mind, after all, would announce that the people who were to be punished would be given a feast? In the dining room, no one goes through the trouble of making this much food without an ulterior motive behind the whole thing. Naruto and the others were sitting on one side, and even though he was tempted by the foods in front of him, he was still able to concentrate on trying to figure out what was going on. He looked at the spread of food on the table, and while he had to admit that it looked delicious and definitely smelled wonderful, the sheer quantity and quality of the food was more than enough to raise his suspicions. After a few more conversations, the king was about to retire, or at least appeared to be, when he turned and threw something at Aang. When the king asked Aang where he came from, Aang said that he came from a place called Kangaroo Island. Naruto had no idea where that was or what the hell kangaroos were, but he could tell that the king was not buying it. At that precise moment, Naruto's battle-tested and hardened reflexes kicked in, and he swiftly pulled a kunai out of his concealed pouch. He had intended to use the weapon to cut down the object the king had thrown at Aang, but he was shocked to discover that it was hardly a weapon. Unless a roasted chicken leg, that's not a weapon. When the king responded at the sight, Naruto's line of thought was spot on because Aang instinctively used his air-bending skills to catch the chicken leg at that precise moment, and he, Katara, and Sokka knew it had done it. Well now, it seems we have an air nomad in our midst, and not just any air nomad, but the Avatar himself. At last, Naruto expressed his feelings to his companions and everyone else in earshot. We are so busted. The guards soon surrounded the area, but Naruto was fast to react and knocked out the first pair that came at him. He blocked a downward strike with his right forearm, then lunged to ram his fist into the guard's stomach and then followed that with a double palm strike. Before he could do anything else, one of the guards used earth bending to grab him by the feet, and before he could do anything else, Aang, Sokka, and Katara surrounded him. As he spoke, the elderly king gave Naruto a long look while glancing at everyone else. You fight well for a foreigner, and your fighting style is different. I've heard that before, I bet you have, but since I have your companions as guests, I suggest you calm down, my golden-haired friend. Naruto clenched his jaw, relaxed, and answered. All right, your highness, you have us. What comes next? Naruto didn't have to wait long to discover. Naruto looked at the crystal-like substance growing on his hand as he, Sokka, and Katara were being taken away to the challenge areas. He could have easily broken free and fought the guards off to help the others the very second they had been taken away earlier, with the exception of Aang, but he felt that doing so was not a good idea. He was not afraid at all, but something about this whole situation seemed to make no sense to him. The old king should have been very happy to learn that the Avatar was among his people, but he took it casually. How did this man act as if he expected it and did not mind having Aang in his home city? Why did he seem unconcerned by the fact that Aang was the last of the air nomads? In addition, he was putting Aang through tests in order to allow him to leave. Why would he be allowed to leave when he could help in the fight against the Fire Nation? Why would he put Aang through this when they had other issues to handle at the moment? Something is happening here, and I'm willing to wager that the elderly man is the one responsible. When Naruto learned that he was correct, he became even more curious about what was happening because the tests that Bumi had prepared were actually somewhat similar to some of the training he had received while still in the academy. It turns out that the king of Omashu had been preparing a series of tests for someone, and despite how strange it sounded, these tests were meant exclusively for Aang. In one such test, Aang was placed in a large underground cavern where the king kept his lunchbox key beneath a roaring waterfall over a stalactite. The blonde could wager that Aang would not have an easy time getting the key, even as the Avatar, because the flow of water would make it difficult to reach the key both above and below, and the smooth, slippery surface of the rock formation meant that Aang would have a hard time gripping it. He's smarter than he looks and undoubtedly an earthbender like his people, so it's possible that he's just acting. This test is more about the mental side of things. How to get the key without going into the waterfall. He's forcing Aang to think creatively. Wait a minute, does that mean that he knows Aang? Then, out of everyone's line of sight, Naruto attempted a small test, and the results readily addressed his inner query. I see. Well, then, I suppose I shouldn't worry at all. Let Aang work things out on his own. Shortly afterward, Aang completed the first test by removing the top of a stalactite and using it as a spear while moving the water aside with his air. Bending the stone spear successfully hooked the key, removed it from its stand, and sent it to the king. But Naruto questioned whether this was the only test the king had in mind. The next test was to take the king's pet for a kiss and a petting session. The creature appeared harmless enough, despite being the strangest looking rabbit he had ever seen in his life. But then it started chasing Aang. It wasn't until Aang realized that the enormous, less cuddly version of the creature was actually the king's pet, whom he named Flopsy of all things, that he could not help but laugh as he watched the enormous, ape-like creature being held by the old man. Soon after, the final test took place in an arena, and Aang was supposed to select his opponent. Two formidable and skilled-looking gladiators appeared to flank the king on either side. Naruto was quick to deduce that this was the real test. Aang needed to pick his opponent carefully and not be deceived by appearances alone. He knew this because of his own profession, where he had encountered individuals who appeared harmless at first but ended up being quite dangerous. Aang picked the king, and Naruto couldn't help but shake his head when the king started acting very strangely and showed off a very muscular body beneath the purple robes. The old man quickly demonstrated his ability as an earthbender by throwing Aang into the ring, and soon after, the two started fighting. Aang attempted to use his typical air nomad evasion techniques, but the king was aware of this and responded that Aang would eventually have to hit him. He's right. Aang must attack quickly, but I don't think the king will make that simple. Aang discovered this with relative ease because the king's ability to use earthbending to attack also meant that he was equally effective at defending himself. Since Aang was unable to attack directly, he had to force the king to defend himself from his own attack, and once he was able to scale it up by creating a tornado to send the next massive attack back at the king, he closed in. Naruto smirked a little, realizing that things had changed and that if the king threw the boulder aside, Aang had a clear shot at him, and if he attempted to squash Aang, he would also be hit. The old man eventually gave in and returned to their location, and Aang was prepared for their release, but not before the king said that he had to answer one question. Aang responded, "Not entirely, please. That is unfair. You promised to release my friends if I passed your tests." "Yes, but if you don't learn anything from the tests, what good are they?" This made Sokka uncomfortable in the slightest, so she responded, "Oh, hurry up." That did not deter the king, who responded, "I'll release your friends if you answer this one question. What's my name?" Sokka tried to give the name, but Naruto was not going to say anything just yet. This was Aang's game. Naruto couldn't help but smirk as the king returned to the throne room. He already knew the king's name, but he remained silent because he chose to let Aang figure it out on his own. Aang was taken aback by that question because he had not expected that of all things. And Aang finally understood after Katara gave him some clues. Now that they were back in the throne room, with the king in the same robes as before, Aang turned to face him while he, Sokka, and Katara continued to surround him with crystals. It was at this point that Aang addressed the king. "I answered your question the same way I solved your tests, like you said a long time ago that I had to open my mind to the possibilities." Aang grinned as he and the others watched, and the king started to laugh heartily at it. "Bumi, you're a mad genius." After releasing Aang, Sokka, and Katara from the crystals, Bumi revealed that they were actually rock candy. The two siblings commented on the king being identified as Aang's old friend, Bumi, and then Bumi explained to Aang what he needed to do to help save the world, master the 4 elements, and deal with Fire Lord Ozai. When he did, Bumi hoped that he would think like a mad genius. He also said that he was in good company with his friends and Momo and that he would require their assistance in the future. Then, as Aang made the decision to divulge his own secret, Naruto addressed him. "You know, before you started figuring out how to cheat on his tests, Aang, I discovered that he was Bumi. If you had looked at the clues and noticed the signs, you could have too." Aang and the others were drawn to that. They had only discovered that the insane king was Bumi, but Naruto had discovered it much earlier than Aang. Bumi spoke after giving Naruto a questioning glance. "How did you discover that I was Aang's longtime friend Bumi before Aang did?" Then Naruto responded to that query. "As a mad king, you initially pretended to be normal enough to those who were not paying attention the moment you gave us permission to have a feast. However, I'm positive that no one would do those things if they didn't have a hidden agenda, and I saw that you weren't interested in learning more about Aang's background because of his attire and tattoos, which are exclusive to airbenders, and you gave me yet another hint after revealing that he was the Avatar. When you revealed Aang's true origins as an air nomad and the Avatar, you reacted very casually. In contrast to your officials, who I'm sure believed that the nomads were all dead and the Avatar was gone, you acted as though you were meeting an old acquaintance after a long time. This meant that you knew about Aang's life as an air nomad and had previously met him, as only Katara and Sokka had known he was the Avatar because they had only met him a few weeks prior. Additionally, the tests were a clue because they were designed to force Aang to think differently than he usually does in order to solve them. It made sense that it was you all along because I remembered what Aang had said about you when you were both young. But the most telling hint I got was when I accidentally scraped my tongue on the crystals without anyone noticing. I realized then that they were rock candy, and I knew you didn't mean to hurt Katara, Sokka, or me to make Aang act seriously in these tests. You gave the impression that Genomite was far more dangerous than it was, am I correct? Bumi smiled and then laughed again as Aang, Sokka, and Katara were impressed after he finished. Aang's elderly friend spoke to him. Your golden-haired friend Aang is a great ally. If he gives you advice, you should follow it in any case. Pay attention to what I've told you to do. I will, Bumi, and now I have a challenge for you. He shook his head at the sounds of both Aang and Bumi crying out in happiness at being able to do this after so long, while Katara and Sokka watched Aang and his old friend Bumi do the very same thing they had enjoyed in their younger years, only this time they were together again. Though Bumi was the physically older of the two, and with him on the tram, there was no doubt that they were not going to get into too much trouble this time around. It looked like a lot of fun, Naruto had to admit, but he passed, as did Sokka and Katara, and he couldn't help but chuckle at what he saw. I have to admit that the whole thing looks fun, but only when I am looking at it a fair distance away. As Aang and Bumi continued their crazy journey through the city's mail system, Katara and Sokka nodded. Naruto decided to gaze out into the sun and sky, taking in the sight for all that it was worth, knowing that there would be more to come until a particular merchant screamed out and they heard a crash. My cabbages. When Naruto heard that, he couldn't help but stare in perplexity.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.